Hello, everyone. I welcome Professor Madhu Vishwanathan to our LED series to offer his perspective on building entrepreneurship in low-income communities, particularly people who are poor and many ways excluded. Professor Madhu has joined Loyola Marymount University recently. Before that, he was faculty at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign for almost 29 years. For me, his uniqueness is his decade-long experiment in subsistence marketplace, and he has done his programs in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. His famous course known as Subsistence Marketplace is a very popular course among students interested to learn more on low-income market dynamics. Approximately 100,000 women have received marketplace literacy program education through his programs. He has received numerous awards and served on the Livelihood Advisory Board of UNHCR. So it's a pleasure to have you, Madhu, in our program. And my first question to you would be very simple. We have seen COVID has pushed a lot of people into poverty, and that's a big phenomenon and concern worldwide. So your perspective to start with, what are the changes taking place, and from your entrepreneurship and marketplace lenses, can you throw some light on that?
Absolutely. And thank you, Kirti. It's always a pleasure to interact with you. I really admire your work. And actually, you are a very good exemplar of the bottom-up approach that we talk about, because you're so grounded. And so it's always a pleasure to interact with you. As Kirti said, I'm a professor of marketing at Loyola Marymount University, and I'm professor emeritus at University of Illinois. And a little over 23 years ago, I started this journey of looking at people with low income and low literacy. And one theme you'll keep seeing is this idea of, we are bottom up. So we don't necessarily start with enterprises and companies as the bottom of the pyramid approach does. We start with people, how they think, how they relate, and so on, and then how they function in marketplaces as consumers and entrepreneurs, and build up from there. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background and overlay that with COVID, because that is our understanding, and I just wanted to bring our angle to it in some detail. Sure. We often talk about poverty context, which I have never experienced in my life. So in some ways, I'm the least qualified to have been studying this. We talk about uncertainty in day-to-day life. And today you overlay that uncertainty with COVID-19 because it's uncertainty in so many fronts. It's uncertainty in understanding this pandemic, even for those of us who have the education and the resources. It's uncertainty because of information and misinformation. It's uncertainty because of what to do to prevent. I mean, there's been so much uncertainty for all of us. So imagine overlaying that uncertainty. It's become a multifold uncertainty for people living in poverty, I believe. Also, we often talk about the fact that not only do people in these subsistence marketplaces have uncertainty, they don't have a margin of error. They have very little margin of error. And now look what's happened with COVID-19. Not only do they have no margin of error, what are the consequences of making an error? It could be lethal. And so it really magnifies everything. And it reminds me of some of our work in refugee settlements and so on, or with a large shock to the system. It could be a financial shock and so on. And so that is kind of the broader setting in which, our perspective perhaps could be useful to understand the complexity of what's going on. One of the ways in which we've approached poverty is we want to unpack it, not just in terms of low income, but also in terms of the fact that it also means you probably don't have a good education, which means there are difficulties with how you can think and grasp simple notions, even as simple as a consumer or an enterprise and so on. And this gets even more complex in the health arena, which has so many causes and effects at different levels of abstraction. You have blood pressure, you have this, you have that, then you have a condition called diabetes. And so when you overlay the COVID-19, you are talking about really trying to grasp this. How do we even grasp something like COVID-19? We can't see it. And so this is part of what's playing out, I think, in terms of people's thinking and their constraints to thinking as a result of not having the income to learn, not having necessarily the education, to understand some of these things that I take for granted, and also, not having the exposure. And this is all the more magnified in a health context. And this is something we've studied before the pandemic itself. It's such a complex arena. Overlay that with the fact that, it is not just the thinking, it's also the self-confidence, even maintaining self-esteem in very mundane kinds of transactions and marketplace interactions, right? And so, for somebody with low literacy, they could be insulted by the shopkeeper. They're afraid to ask a question. This also is the case when dealing with, medical experts. And so you have this whole, issue of, am I even going to be able to grasp all of these things from a point of view of self-confidence and, emotion, and then overlay that with fear and panic and with stigma. If somebody in the street has COVID, then what does it mean, right? So this adds on to the emotional side as well. And then, when we think of, people living in poverty, and I remember it was literally 23 years ago, and I took a group of people shopping in central Illinois, I thought, look at the things I take for granted. And I say that because my first home, I remember in 1962 in Bombay, was middle class. And it was a very good 2-bedroom home in Colaba, Badwar Park. So that's where I started, right? And so I said, what are the things I take for granted? And today I would say the things we take for granted are not just the higher income and the resources. It's our ability to think and abstract and understand different concepts at rich levels and access information on a smartphone and digest it and all of that. It's our ability to be self-confident in a variety of different arenas. It's also our ability to cope behaviorally, in terms of our actions in different places. But there is one arena where I truly believe people living in poverty are richer than me, which is relationally, socially. And that is a double-edged sword. We all know that. We know that same social relationships can lead to ostracizing and humiliation if somebody doesn't return a loan and all of that. But it is something to build on. Now, look what's happened with COVID-19. Essentially, that relational aspect. You have to fear your neighbor. You could infect them. They could infect you. So the one dimension of relative richness that people living in poverty have has been really jeopardized with COVID-19. And so that's kind of the complexity in which we try to understand. Of course, I'm putting our own lens on it, even though we claim to be bottom up, but this is part of what happens. And with COVID-19, there are a number of remarkable things, but I just wanted to paint the problem as I see it, just from some interactions across the world. And then, of course, I'm putting my prior lens on it as well. So it has its usual biases. So.
People who are in trouble, and we know they are coming back to poverty, a lot of people coming back to poverty. In that context, what are the things that bothering you when you see it from a distance? What we need to do in terms of building their capacities or building their abilities at this juncture to really move forward and come back to their previous position, and also deal with the situation in a better way, and they ultimately have better income. So how do you see this from the entrepreneurial side of this whole COVID and aftermath?
Absolutely. So part of it, as you know, Kirti, we really call them consumer entrepreneurs. We've heard of terms like necessity entrepreneurship. I tend to call it means entrepreneurship. They're amazing at using very limited means. It may not be new to the world products and so on. So one thing is literally that the people we are studying, and sorry to go back to be a little broader, they are unequal and they're essential for the most part. They're unequal because their lives have less value wherever we are in the world. That's true. And they're essential because they are the ones providing the services. It could be healthcare workers, small farmers that make me today subsist, survive, and thrive as well. Right. And so in light of that, one thing that's happening is, literally barely essential consumption. It could be 3 to 2 meals in a refugee settlement, for example. If I was getting rations of, $10 a month, it may be $6 a month. And so, people are still trying to leverage, and say, okay, let the 4 families eat one meal and we'll cook it together so that we have the maize and so on. So it's just unbelievable, just beyond the imagination as to how people are coping on the consumption side. On the entrepreneurship side, we see lots of different cases. For example, I'm a carpenter, and this is what brought me here. I know to do this. Now I realize furniture is now a luxury. So what can I do that is subsistence? I'm a flower farmer. It could be in Latin America. And I know that people are not going to buy flowers now. So how do I move to rice and so on? How do I get the people to harvest and so on? So very basic things like, do I stay with this path? And many people said, this is what brought me here. This is what I know. Or people are saying any viable alternative. If I have a vehicle, I'm going to supply water. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And what's happening also is that when an entire street gets shut down, very understandably, because all entities are trying to do their best. All of us are in an extraordinarily difficult circumstance, unprecedented, right? And then, what happens to, my ability to do things? You see people, really taking entrepreneurship, and I insist on using that word entrepreneurship as you do, Kirti, because this is what they are. They are true entrepreneurs, but they're just trying to take it to a whole different level in saying, okay, now how do I move this way or that way? One other dimensions, and I'll use our own example, is here we are. I wish I could report to you that we are doing more. We are not, but here we are with marketplace literacy. And as you know, Kirti, the idea there is how do we enable consumers and entrepreneurs? And what's unique about our approach is we try to give people an understanding of the marketplace, know why. Because that's exactly what, as I mentioned earlier, is a big deficit in terms of people's understanding because they don't have an education. So why should I be a good customer? Why should I be customer oriented? Why should I choose this business? Now, here we are, we try to bring people together, whether it's in India, Tanzania, wherever. And that, whether it's self-help groups, Vicobas, that is completely hampered. It is dangerous. And so as of March, pretty much shutting everything down. And we really need to figure out and reimagine the same kinds of connections virtually, right? And it's easy to say, it sounds very nice to say, but how are we going to do that? In Honduras, we are trying to experiment with, using WhatsApp clips as a broadcast medium. And then we want to see if we can virtually bring people together to go more deeper, because we don't believe that broadcasting something is education. And the one way I would distinguish what we do from others is it's in-depth education of concepts rather than training. So we're not training a farmer on a technique. We want them to understand the value chain more deeply and how they can engage in it. And so, we are trying to say, okay, how do we use things that people have access to? As you know, Kirti, having a smartphone doesn't mean you know how to use it, right? And so we are trying to say, okay, what do you have access to, and how can we use that digital medium? So that's one arena. Again, easy for me to say, but trying to figure out, all the more important now, what are other ways I can create value? Because one thing we try to overcome with marketplace literacy is that, I know how to sew clothes. I know how to do a particular thing. Therefore, I'll do this, versus saying, no, you have to look outward. Even though you have so little and you have this one skill, and it's natural to think that I know how to do this, you have to think outward. Now that is multiplied even more. And if anything, I think COVID-19 shows us that it's the people with the least who have to adapt the most. And that is why we believe in this deeper understanding, because if they have that deeper understanding, we see them adapt. If they run a small store and a big store with a lot of capital comes in, then they say, okay, I'm going to sell country medicine. That has to now multiply manyfold. And of course, people do it naturally. They do it out of necessity. They do it because they are means entrepreneurs. So it's we see that extraordinary resilience as well. But we also need to be thinking, how do we enable that? Another aspect, Kirti, is the digital side, right? The digital payment and so on, and getting people comfortable. I know there's been lots of progress in India, but we need even more progress. And, I was just looking yesterday, as I was thinking of this conversation of voice recognition based and so on, and how WhatsApp is working with other entities and so on. So this ability for digital payment is one side of it. the ability for digital connection, because if I need, people on my farm or something, how do I connect to others? And it's again, I don't mean this to sound fancy, but whether it's a kind of an Airbnb, Uber type of model, how do I get the services? And how do I learn how to use, I may have a smartphone, but it may be my daughter who's teaching me how to use it. So there is that digital, connection to the marketplace, which of course has been going on for a long time, but we need it to a much bigger scale. There is also the digital manufacturing opportunities with, makerspace and, 3D printing. Unfortunately, we just experimented with it. We couldn't go further, but we started this a few years ago and trying to, and it was very interesting again to see how people are able to use this. So if they know, how to use something like that, they also need to know how to distribute it digitally, through the connection with the platform. So we need a comprehensive set of platforms that are usable by people. And, one of the things, as you know, Kirti, that I do, as you mentioned, is teaching on Coursera. And, these are amazing, media and platforms in order to teach. But my challenge has always been, how can you teach somebody virtually who essentially doesn't know how to sit at a computer and start off, right? And that is what we need to be doing. It's almost like a Google for people in subsistence marketplaces. You cannot assume they know what an interface is and move around. How do we do that? And I know there are experiments there as well, but I think we need to challenge ourselves in that way. And you know this much better than I do. Anything in India, we need to figure out how to figure it out, at least to medium scale. And so I think that the whole digital, and in my world, it's digital marketplace literacy, to be honest.
Situation, but you also used the word adaptability. So at this context, while you touched upon this is a transition phase, and from carpenter, somebody is looking at some other opportunity. So in the phase of transition, the opportunity scenario also changing, and hence adaptability is a critical dimension for people who are really at the cutting edge in terms of poverty. For them, bring little further in terms of for those kind of people, what would work in terms of teaching, skilling, building their entrepreneurial capability in the context of from one context to other in terms of adaptability. How do you, what do you now?
No, excellent question, Kirti. And I'm going to give you my oversimplified answer. I really think of this in terms of three major components: financial resources, whether it's microfinancing, etc. Of course, the capital, financial capital. Then I think of access. And access is not just that you can go to a marketplace, but you can get some value for what you create. And the third is me conveniently calling it marketplace literacy. And marketplace literacy to me consists of what, how, and why. And the what part are specific livelihood skills, extremely important. The how part could be how do you keep accounts and so on. And the why part is, really where we believe there is a huge deficit because people just have not had the education, they've not had the exposure and so on. So even, I may call it a business, they just think of it as an exchange. Right. And so you can go in as a company and say, we are so-and-so and this is what we do. And people are going to say, can I trust you? So people are at a very human level. They're not thinking, they don't have the luxury to think in terms of economic models and all that. They're trying to survive. And I have found that the why part, and I've been a very big skeptic of what we do, but I have found the why part to be so powerful. And I'll give you one example, which is that, we do our program and then we essentially ask people, what did you learn? And women will say, I'm going to take over buying from my husband. I'm going to check expiry. I'm going to do this. I'm going to check prices. I'm going to tell the shopkeeper I'll go to another place. So we see self-confidence, we see knowledge and skills, we see awareness of right. So I'll stop this person or other audiences and say, why didn't you do this 4 days ago? Whose money were you spending? And when you build a relationship, you can have fun with it. And one woman gave me a fantastic answer. She said, I never thought of myself as a customer. So now she understands the concept of a customer. Now, we have seen this time and again. I remember one of the person driving our vehicle in Tanzania, he came and observed and he said, it's very interesting what you do because all you gave, and we didn't give, we just gave the climate or the environment where people learned was this idea of, understand why, right? And we do very simple types of tasks to do that. And that, he said, was very powerful. And what people do in this context is they multiply the little that you enable for them. And I've seen women time and again, like with extreme poverty, we may teach them how to be a good customer. They don't have the money to buy anything. So they'll use it to become a good entrepreneur by buying from the supplier and so on. And so, but at the same time, I'm not arguing you just do know why or there's any magic bullet. People automatically ask me, okay, you did this, but what about a livelihood now? And so we have to be both bottom up and top down in saying, okay, here are some livelihood opportunities, but we also have to allow the bottom up where people create. And I don't mean it in a romanticized way. It's really both, right? And we have to be very proactive in looking at some livelihood opportunities and then basically letting people understand the why part of running any enterprise, because there's one actuality, one undeniable fact, which COVID has just magnified, which is that even in normal circumstances, who has to adapt the most? Because whose livelihood is most fragile? It's the person at the bottom. It's people in subsistence marketplaces. And so they have to change, they have to adapt. And that is going to be even more the case now. And people are adaptable, but there are these small levers, I believe. And of course, self-servingly, I'll say one lever is the in-depth education. Again, it doesn't take a long time. I'm talking about 3-4 days of engagement and so on, or for a couple of times. But the idea of understanding the marketplace in a deeper way, because once you have understanding, it's not just I'm a consumer, I need to do this. No, here's the market, here's where the product comes from, here's where it ends up, here's the value chain. Therefore, I can bypass the retailer and go to the wholesaler and so on. We see people immediately coming together and multiplying that effect in so many ways. And so I would say, again, I'm going back to my biased answer, but I'm a very big believer that there are these small levers, and one of them is this deeper understanding. Of course, that alone is by far not enough. We can move out from there to access and financial resources, and also the livelihood, the what part. But then we have to move beyond that now to other arenas like health, right? I mean, how do I run a business so that I'm socially distanced, I'm safe, the customer is safe? People are managing, they're adapting. People are saying, I hold my food shop outside and so on. But, that needs to be a part of, just like the digital, I think the health part, needs to be there as well. Because who knows, with this kind of a pandemic, and then you think about deforestation and the causes of this and so on, and then we think of climate change, this may be the beginning of a new normal. And I think people getting adapted to that. One thing I know, if you give people the opportunity, by and large, they will teach us how to adapt.
Completely. Then how really we need to build their deeper understanding to real actualization, wherein we have to give them some extra training, some extra knowledge about how to prepare a small business plan, how to really go and talk to the banker. All these are elements which we used to do hands-on with them in our different programs. Even I have my exposure to your program, I've seen that happening on ground. In current scenario, which likely to be there, we all now Zoom centric, or we have now become very online people. We have adopted, but from a training education point of view, do you think we can still achieve what we wanting to achieve, or the way we used to achieve in this current scenario, in terms of building their capacity, building their abilities to adopt very quickly?
Oh, excellent question, Kirti. I think I'm thinking of first of Zoom itself, right? And there are some countries where we can teach people and then they come on audio in Zoom. And we do this when we have these virtual interviews for our students across the world and so on. But coming back to your question, it's almost like we have to, first of all, reimagine whether it's self-help groups, etc., virtually. And then there is a very logistical, fundamental question of the limits of a WhatsApp in terms of number of people and quality of calls, the limits of Skype, the limits of, can we multi-conference and so on, right? And of course, video would become quite a big luxury. So what I would say is that we were able to innovate in one sense, and this is, I'm going back more than a decade, where we, working with Madura Microfinance, we had this movie as a platform, Shakti Rising. And then we developed 14 video-based lessons And we assumed a teacher on a screen, so it's completely video based, but we still need a facilitator there. Because the facilitator gets the groups going, gets the work going, but it's not a skilled teacher. It's the person there is a facilitator. That is how we were able to scale, and Madura Microfinance has done an amazing job as well. You know, they've just really set the example of combining financing with this type of education. But now, my argument then would have been that, even for the courses, I teach, and Kirti, you may know that I had the privilege of launching the online MBA for University of Illinois. It's now reportedly the fastest growing MBA in the world. And so we had launched it, an amazing team about 5 years ago. But my thinking has always been that, well, even for people with high levels of literacy, what do? We have asynchronous learning, but we have Zoom, and we have synchronous live sessions, studio, etc. Right? Now, I think we don't have a choice. With people with low literacy and low income, we have to figure out a way. And this is really this idea of, well, we're going to stimulate you with some asynchronous kind of clips, but then we need to bring you together, and you need to be virtually connected to each other, and probably geographically proximate as well, because then, there's a chance that when you can have the physical interaction. So we literally have to recreate this. And this is where I wish I could tell you that we had made more progress than we had, but that is certainly the intention, that, how do we try to do this virtually? Now, having done that, you're absolutely right. How do we create in-depth education in that context, with bad connections and so on? And how do we create continuity? So part of it is that we are creating a community. It is not the fact that they look at clips and say, I got it. I watched this. I watched the video. That is not education. Education is when they argue with each other and fight, and, in a nice way, and then come up with things, and then go out and try it out and come back. We have to create that continuity virtually. We now have no choice. And then we have to figure out a way how to make it of better quality. So I would almost say quantitatively try doing it, and then qualitatively make it better. So
I think this is a space which needs some amount of innovation, because through your videos, my exposure says excellent videos in terms of transforming knowledge. And that's an excitement I had in terms of, you have already taken some path in terms of virtualization of training. But now, as you're saying, from there to really get the results, there is some amount of innovations in terms of bringing those discourse, bringing those arguments, bringing those debates back into a virtual mode, so that people learn faster and learn it better, because we don't have other choices. So your experience which you had, don't you think you have now having a challenging opportunity really to take the next step and build a very 360-degree approach through online media?
I really appreciate what you're saying, Kirti. I think that, these are the moments that we have to confront and just take and capture. We really have to, capture the moment with both hands, because just look at me and how privileged I am.
And the COVID, post-COVID, from Indian scenario, if we want to really take another 10,000 people through your experiment, maybe scale it up to other places, what are the 2-3 advice you have for us to look at and then build further on that kind of a model?
I think first and foremost, something very close to what you do, Kirti. I think we need to build those models bottom up, because then we have people who are from the communities, and that's easier said than done. But what I mean is, the moment we build a structure and we say, build it top down, I think we make it, cost ineffective. It's not even affordable anymore. And then we need to find, exactly as you said, virtual ways to essentially, convey this, this type of education. I would love to, think about a program in Hindi, for example. We've had some small experiments, but really it's limitless. But at the same time, I'll say, Kirti, that being bottom up, we need to let the community also educate us, instead of saying, I have a program, I have marketplace literacy, and like a hammer looking for nails. Then I'm, it's really becomes more about me and us rather than about them. And I think that is very important. And the other point I'll make, which is, again, I'm sorry to go philosophical again, but is that, it is not that I am helping anybody. I'm the most enriched as a result of this. I have learned from so many people. And the very notion that I am helping them, I believe, is counterproductive. Mm-hmm. This is who we are. This is what we do. and we are essentially interacting with people who are educating us as well. It is mutual. And I think that mindset is very important, because who knows that, learning to fish is more important than fish. It's the people at the bottom. They know that. They know that in every meal. I'm the one who doesn't know it well enough. So I think we need to have that humility in going forward. And I would love to explore these opportunities, in order to take our experience and see if more people can benefit from it.
Lovely. So I take three words in last 2 minutes. One is, as facilitator, I think we should have the ability to learn faster and cope up with the situation as a student rather than a teacher. So the learning is critical. And second word, you said bottom up. That's a non-negotiable. Looking at the people we are now dealing with, that's another area which is again non-negotiable for us. And third area is furthering the virtual medium to really reach out to the people who are disadvantaged. So these three things would define the entrepreneurship dimensions in terms of training, capacity building, skilling, all that. I think these are very wise words, and as a framework, I think if we put these are conditions to build further, I think we will get some desired result as we expect. So with this, I think I have come to the conclusion, and then I wish you all the best, and thank you very much for coming and joining our conversation. This is, as always, it was a pleasure talking to you, Madhu. Thank you very much.
Kirti, thank you